Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Singh and I'm the CEO of the Australia-India Institute, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here this morning. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered here on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, both past, present and emerging. Today, I am honoured to welcome you here to the University of Melbourne for the launch of the India Economic Strategy Update with Australia's Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, the Honourable Dan Tehan. Thank you, Minister, for being here with us today for this most auspicious occasion, but also to welcome you back to your old campus. I'd also like to acknowledge our distinguished guests here that are with us. Jennifer Westacott, the Chief Executive of the Business Council of Australia, who will be joining us on stage here later this morning. India's Melbourne Consul General, Mr. Raj Kumar. Vice-Chancellor of the University of Melbourne, Professor Duncan Maskell. And Deputy Vice-Chancellor International of the University of Melbourne, Professor Michael Wesley. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Australia-India Institute, we are honoured to be hosting today's launch of the India Economic Strategy Update by Minister Tehan. Published in 2018, an India Economic Strategy to 2035, Navigating from Potential to Delivery, was authored by Australia's former High Commissioner to India and former DFAT Secretary, Mr. Peter Varghese. There is no doubt that this document has created a blueprint for the future of our economic engagement and remains a key framework for driving the Australia-India relationship forward. But of course, Peter wrote this document in a pre-COVID context, so it is both prudent and timely that given the changing global context our countries find themselves in, that an updated action plan was done by government as a way forward. Equally significant, it is important to highlight that India also reciprocated with the Australia Economic Strategy Report, authored by Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, former Secretary East of India's Ministry for External Affairs. The AES is the only strategy report produced by the Indian government for a specific country, which truly demonstrates the seriousness with which both countries seek to advance the economic relationship. Indeed, the IES has also been a key platform for guiding the Australia-India Institute's new strategy, 2022 to 26, which recently launched last week. Here at the Institute, we recognise the importance in Australia getting the relationship with India right. Through our engagement with leading experts, policymakers, analysts and researchers, the Institute is Australia's leading centre dedicated to promoting support for and understanding of the Australia-India relationship. We work to increase the policy and public importance of India as a crucial partner in Australia's future and of Australia as a crucial partner in India's future. And so to commemorate the 75th anniversary of India's independence this year, the Institute recently launched our India Matters program for 2022, which includes events, policy briefs, podcasts and interviews on why India matters to Australia and the world. And I encourage you to go to our new website to find out more about that. India Matters also provides policy-oriented research and commentary on our three program areas: security and geopolitics, bilateral economy and cultural diplomacy. Building bilateral economic ties with India, a complex, diverse, fast-growing and large economy, requires long-term commitment. Forging links with India requires engagement on a number of levels with a wide set of stakeholders whom we have here today, including government, industry groups and corporate leaders. And so I thank you all for coming and showing your support for the relationship. Finally, I want to emphasise the importance of the Indian diaspora to our economic engagement. The Institute sees the diaspora as a key asset to the bilateral relationship and remains committed to engaging Indian communities, students, professionals, businesses and emerging leaders here at the Institute. And I'm pleased that some of our Indian intern students are with us here today. As Peter Varghese notes in the IES, the Australian Indian diaspora is a national economic asset and should be engaged and deployed as such. I couldn't agree more. So I'm very excited to see the government is also launching today its new Diaspora Mapping Report, which explores Indian diaspora networks and their capacity to contribute to the Australia-India trade and investment relationship. This report, which is also on your tables, truly demonstrates the value of that Australia is placing on nurturing our deep people-to-people ties. So welcome, and with that, I would now like to invite Vice-Chancellor Professor Duncan Maskell to introduce Minister the Honourable Dan Tehan. Thanks, Duncan.
Thanks very much, Lisa. I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which the University of Melbourne conducts its work in education and research, and with the wider community, and I pay my respects to Indigenous elders, past and present. I'd like to echo Lisa in warmly welcoming to campus Australia's Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Dan Tehan. Minister Tehan, of course, knows the university very well from his days as an arts student here, as you've heard, at Melbourne, and obviously more recently as well as Federal Education Minister. So welcome again, Minister, and thanks for coming today to the Australia-India Institute. The Australia-India Institute is indeed an extremely important part of the University of Melbourne community, just as the relationship with the Indian community as a whole, both here in Australia and in India itself, is extremely important to this university. Our commitment to the India relationship has only strengthened in recent years, despite the challenges of the pandemic, with many important collaborations continuing and developing in new ways between our staff and students here and numerous partner institutions, including governments and universities in India. In one sign of that vibrant international university relationship, we were absolutely delighted last month to welcome the Indian Minister for External Affairs, Dr. Jaishankar, to the Institute for another important public conversation also led by Lisa. With the opening of borders and the reopening of campuses post-COVID, I look forward greatly to even stronger interactions between the Australia-India Institute and University on the one side, and many colleagues, distinguished guests and students from India on the other. Today, it is a pleasure to welcome the Minister to deliver important updates to the Australian Government's India Economic Strategy to 2035. Without in any way wishing to steal the Minister's thunder, of course, I would point out that the work that we undertake here and in other universities, both through the Australia-India Institute here and more broadly throughout our university, particularly in education, but also in research, does form a very important part of the overall economic relationship between Australia and India. And since, as we all know, economics isn't everything, I would also highlight the invaluable cultural benefits to all of us in India and in Australia that flow from this education and the strengthening of bilateral Indian-Australia ties in business and many other fields, something that we strive hard to champion here at Melbourne. And I would just add personally, it was great to see the students celebrating Holi the other day here on campus. Fortunately, I did not get covered in pigment and etc. You did. Yeah. Anyway, without further ado, please join me now in welcoming the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, Dan Tehan.
Thanks, Duncan. And can I too pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, and pay my respects to their leaders past, present and future, and just take this opportunity to say that all of us should want to and strive to increase our knowledge and understanding of our Indigenous heritage. And if I could just point to one thing that I think all of you could do in this room, if you haven't already, to just get a real understanding of that, is go to my electorate and visit a site called Budj Bim, which is in Western Victoria, where 65,000 years ago, the first agriculture took place that we know of in human civilisation. In this instance, it was aquaculture, and you can still go and see the eel traps that were used 65,000 years ago. And it's a great way to really understand the rich and deep culture that our Indigenous peoples have. And so I would implore you to go and visit a site like that, or one of the many numerous sites where you can really grow and learn and understand of the rich history that we're privileged to have a part of our nation. Can I thank the Vice-Chancellor for hosting us today here at Melbourne University, and it's wonderful to be back. Lisa, can I thank the Australia-India Institute for also hosting us, and it's wonderful to see you, and I commend you for the role that you're playing at the Institute and the direction that you're taking it in. And I see a very, very bright future for the Institute in the years ahead, and I think it has an important role to play, and I'll touch on that in a minute going forward. Can I also acknowledge all our distinguished guests here in the room, and I won't go through everyone, but I will acknowledge that we have the former Premier of Victoria here, Ted Baillieu, and Ted, it's wonderful to see you. I'm here to launch two reports today, two significant reports which go to highlight how important the Australia-India relationship is and how important it's going to be into the future. I think all of us in this room would know and acknowledge that there has never been a more important time for Australia and India to enhance its relationship. Given the geostrategic sands and the way that they are shifting at the moment, our two countries need to come together like we have never come before. And we saw an example of how we are going to do that yesterday when our two Prime Ministers met and made a number of announcements of how they want to enhance the relationship. And I want to add to that this morning, because in launching the updated economic strategy for our two nations, there are some important initiatives that I also want to discuss and announce. The first of which is that we will be providing $16.6 million to strengthen linkages with India's key policy and finance institutions. So what we want to do is make sure across every field, across every area of research, that we are bringing the two countries closer and closer together. When it comes to policy, we need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to link our policy institutes and our departments closer and closer together. And that 16.6 million will be aimed at doing that. And I want to give you an example of why that is so important. At this very moment, I am in very, very detailed discussions in trying to conclude an interim free trade agreement with India. As a matter of fact, at 6 o'clock this morning, I was jogging around the Tehan and I got a very good friendly call from my good friend, the Indian Trade Minister, Piyush Goyal, wanting to discuss where we go and how we can make sure that we nail the deal by the end of this week or early next week, all going well. And the strength of the relationship that we've been able to build over the last 6 to 7 months has meant that we are in a position that I hadn't imagined that we would be in, of landing a free trade agreement, hopefully in the next week. We've been talking quite often, twice daily. Obviously, I've been to India twice in the last 7 months. He sent his negotiating team out here to Australia 3 weeks ago and offered again this morning to send them over again if it was needed later this week. And it's the strength of that relationship and the strength of the friendship that we've been able to develop, and I can quite honestly stand here today and say I do not have a friendship like I have with Piyush with any other trade minister globally. It's that friendship and that closeness and that trust which has enabled us to get where we are. And what we need to be able to do is see that happen across the board. So one of the things that would help this negotiation like no tomorrow is if we had a similar understanding and trust between the various bureaucracies here in Australia and in India. So if we had those linkages between the head of our Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, our head of our Treasury, the head of our Finance Department, with the head of the External Affairs Department in India, the head of their Treasury, the head of their Finance Department, that would grow and enhance how we can come together to land deals like this, but also other deals across the board. And one of the things that we were able to announce yesterday, that the leaders were able to announce, which came out of our negotiations through this free trade agreement, was in the next 6 months we're going to harmonise the recognition of degrees between Australia and India. Now that is something that Piyush and I have worked on to have as part of our free trade agreement. And it's an early harvest, an early harvest of that agreement that was announced yesterday. And wouldn't it be fantastic if Indian students could come to Australia and study 2 years of their degree and then go back and finish their degrees in India? Or Australian student, a young student here at Melbourne University could begin their degree and then go to India to finish their degree. That would be a great sign of the growing closeness of the relationship. The second thing that we're announcing is $8.9 million to support enhanced business engagement and an increased Austrade presence in India. Because it's not only the government-to-government links that we need to improve, and Jennifer, I'm sure we will discuss this, and it's great to see you here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation in a minute, but it's growing and enhancing those business-to-business links, getting a proper investment relationship developed, getting proper commercial ties developed that really build on and enhance the relationship. That is something that we need to fully develop. And of course, there is our diplomatic presence in India. And what I'm announcing today is that Austrade will be setting up an office in Bengaluru. And that will mean that we have the same diplomatic footprint in India that we currently have with China, and it's only one less than what we have with the United States. Now, my aim is to make sure that over the coming years that we have a diplomatic presence in India which matches the United States, because that to me would then be a terrific symbol of how close the relationship is, how close two liberal democracies seeking to find a path in this new world, a path which sets global rules that means all countries can thrive and prosper in a peaceful way, that we both understand the importance of that through the diplomatic presence that we share. So that is what we're seeking to strive through our enhanced economic engagement strategy. It will not be the last advancement of this economic strategy. One of the things that I'm very keen to see is that it becomes a living document. So we've had the first one. We've now, because of COVID, made sure we've enhanced it, but it should become a living document that we seek to enhance into the future. And so I hope that this will be the economic engagement strategy 2.0, which will soon be followed in years to come with 3.0, 4.0 and 5.0. The other thing that I'm privileged to launch today, or the other document, is the Australian-Indian Diaspora, a national asset, which is a very important study which has been undertaken of the Indian diaspora here in Australia. And it is well worth a read because it shows the contribution that the Indian diaspora is making here in Australia already and will make into the future. So what is the contribution that is being made? Well, first of all, it's a sizable contribution. The Indian diaspora is second now only to the United Kingdom diaspora in Australia. So it is of growing significance. And the second thing is, it is helping us as a nation. The Indian diaspora brings with it youth, it brings with it intellect, and it brings with it skills that we need as a nation. So it is helping to improve, it is helping to uplift us as a nation. And I would commend this document to you, and I think it shows very much a way forward. I hope as part of the free trade agreement that I'm seeking to finalise in the coming days, that we will be able to have a significant mobility chapter, which will lead to those people-to-people links growing, and that over time we will be able to build on that mobility chapter in that FTA. And I hope also that we will begin to see the Indian diaspora populate more and more the key institutions that we have here in Australia. When I started at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, we had one young Indian who started with me as part of our journey. Now, my hope would be that in future we will see DFAT taking graduates from our Indian diaspora 4, 5, 6, 7 at a time, so that we can use their skills and their knowledge to make as we outreach across the world. But also, it would be wonderful if our chief scientists had deputies that came from our Indian diaspora. It would be wonderful if our state and territory bureaucracies also had leading them Indians from our Indian diaspora. That is the vision that we should be seeking to achieve here in a nation. And when you see the skills that they bring, the knowledge that they bring, and the youth that they bring to our population, there is no reason why we shouldn't be seeking and striving to make that happen. So, Lisa, thank you for hosting me here today. Thank you for enabling me to launch these two important documents. I'm looking forward to the conversation with Jennifer. Can I thank you all for coming along today? Can I thank you for your interest in the relationship? It is a relationship that's going to go to strength, and I can see from your attendance here that you want to be part of that journey. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Minister, and I'll invite Jennifer Westacott to come and join us on stage. Well, Minister, very exciting announcements you just made, clearly highlighting the strength in which the Australian-India relationship continues to grow, the launch of these two reports. I think I wanted to start with the India Economic Strategy update, because we know that this is an update. As you said, it adds to that original 2018 blueprint, as I called it, of the Peter Varghese India Economic Strategy. You've got a very ambitious agenda for the Australia-India relationship, importantly so. But since the existence of this IES in 2018, there's a lot that's changed. You've highlighted some of that. And so now we have this updated document. Do you see that the government's moving away from the original India Economic Strategy? Or how do you see this complementing Peter Varghese's original sort of vision?
Look, I don't think we're moving away from the original, but so much has changed in the last 3 to 4 years that I just think the document was going to be lacking if we didn't update it. If you think what's happened through the last 2 years of COVID, that's been significant. But I think more importantly, if you think what's happened geostrategically, there has been monumental changes in the last 4 years. Globalisation is changing before our eyes. Supply chains are changing before our eyes. The way that the countries are trying to secure supply chains has changed significantly. We've seen economic coercion occurring, the like of which we hoped we wouldn't see in a globalised world, but the reality is that it is happening. So all these things that we've had to deal with, and I think that's why it was so important to update the strategy. I'll point to one area where I think it's become more apparent than most of the need to do that, and that's in the critical minerals rare earths area. You know, these are absolutely key ingredients to the future of the Australian economy, the future of the Indian economy. Making sure that we have secure supplies of rare earths and critical minerals is absolutely vital. And there's a real opportunity in our relationship with India to secure supply chains with India when it comes to rare earths and critical minerals. And I think that's just highlights one important area of why we needed to update the strategy. And I think we're going to see that relationship in that key area continue to grow, along with many other areas. I mean, in the IT area, that's going to be another key. And you think of the importance of cyber security in today's world. We need the IT skills to be able to grow our cyber capabilities, and India will be a very important market for us of those skills going forward. And our technology, our research and development, the work that's done here at Melbourne Uni in that R&D space will help India as it seeks to develop as well. So there's a real mutual benefit from our economies engaging more deeply through this strategy.
Jennifer, you've just heard the Minister outline a number of targeted sectorial initiatives. You know, we've got this updated strategy now in front of us. How do you see business committing the resources that it needs to invest in India for the long term? And, you know, how do you see business responding to this update today?
I think they'll be very positive. I think we have to remember that there's already a lot happening to build on. So you've got, you know, a real diversification of companies that have got big presence, and that's changing in terms of traditional kind of resources-based trade to Atlassian having a big presence, Cochlear. Then you've got a lot of stuff happening in BHP and BlueScope, and then you've got great Indian companies with an expanded presence in Australia like Infosys and Tata Consulting. And so I think those relationships, Lisa, are already very strong. But what Australian companies, I think, know is exactly the sort of geo-economics that the Minister's just so well outlined, that they have to diversify, not just in markets but in products. And that if we want to be a clean energy superpower, if we want to be in the space economy, if we want to be in the defence economy, if we want to be in the top 5 digital economies, there's a really obvious partner, and that's India. And in many respects, when I look at the Indian economy, it's going to leapfrog a lot of technological kind of normal linear progression. And we ought to be doing the sorts of things the Minister's outlined today, that particularly that mutual recognition Minister of University qualifications, that's a cracking kind of practical idea, because we are going to have that exchange of skills and talent, and obviously as part of that pulling through a migration program. So, you know, I think there's just a lot to build on. I think Australian companies will react very positively to this. Obviously, we've got to get the FTA done. I know the Minister's working around the clock to do that, and it's got to be rushed, not right, I think is the... rushed, right, not rushed, get it right. But it's got to be right. I know the Minister's committed to that. But we've got to make sure that we do the work that helps business get into this market in a more easy way, I think.
Absolutely. Well, let's go to the interim free trade agreement, Minister, because we know you've been working round the clock on this with Minister Goyal day and night, and whilst jogging and sleeping and everything else. It's all been full steam ahead, and we're all waiting with bated breath on the outcome of those, I'm sure, challenging negotiations. But how do you see, at least, the interim free trade agreement sort of complementing or relating to this India economic strategy update?
Well, it'll provide the important framework that we need to the strategy, and that's what we're seeking to create. And so far, the discussions have gone very well, to the extent that I think we've come a lot further than both myself and Minister Goyal imagined in the discussions that we've been able to have. So much so that we're looking at an agreement which we would seek to get ratified at the WTO. So it would be a serious standalone interim agreement. And it will provide a very important framework for business. I think also be a sign of confidence from both governments in the economic relationship. And we shouldn't underestimate, send a very important signal at this time of the willingness of both governments not only to work very closely together in the strategic sphere, but to work very closely together in the economic sphere. And we shouldn't underestimate the challenges globally towards trade liberalisation, investment liberalisation. They are immense. And if we can put a flag in the sand at this time, which shows that Australia and India are committed to that path of liberalisation, I think the rest of the world, and I do not say this lightly, the rest of the world will stand up and take note. There is huge interest from my ministerial colleagues across the world to these discussions that we are having with India. They are raised every single call that I make, including by the US Commerce Secretary only a week ago, wanting to know how these discussions are going. So if we land this, we shouldn't underestimate the importance and the message that it will send globally as well. So, there's a lot riding on it. We understand that. Obviously, we've got to get it right. It's got to be in the interests of both countries, and we aren't rushing for the sake of rushing. We really want to make sure that it's something meaningful. And the clock's ticking. I've described it as, for those Harry Potter fans, it's a bit like a game of Quidditch, and the FTA is that snitch, that elusive snitch that we're trying to get hold of. And every time we think we're there, it just sort of just ducks away. But I'm sure if we can get our broomsticks aligned, we'll get there.
Well, I have heard it being described as the moment. But I do like the Harry Potter analogy a bit more. But I think that's because, Minister, India has traditionally been seen as a protectionist economy. And so, interesting that you talk about the United States wanting to see how this plays out. It's been seen perhaps as a difficult economy to crack, slow to reform, but with obviously plenty of opportunity. There's clearly a momentum that things have changed a lot in that regard with India. So why is everyone calling this the moment? What is different now?
Well, I think under Prime Minister Modi, the Indian economy is transforming, and he is reforming the Indian economy. And I think what we're seeing is quite extraordinary things taking place economically in India at the moment. So I think that momentum is what countries are seeking to really capture and be a part of. And I think, full credit to Prime Minister Modi and his stewardship of the Indian economy. That I think is the single thing that has got the world watching and wanting to be a part of. And obviously for Australia, it's something that we've been working on. It dates back really, I remember as a young DFAT official going to India with Mark Vaile when he was Trade Minister in 2004, and we were trying to seek to conclude a TIFA, a Trade and Investment Framework Agreement. So we were even then trying to grow and enhance the economic relationship, and I think this is the moment now because of what, especially what we've seen under Prime Minister Modi more recently.
I can see some heads nodding about those Mark Vaile days. So we have come a long way. Jennifer, there's a lot of messaging around what it takes for business to be successful in India. It tends to be on perhaps finding the appropriate local partner and that willingness to invest in the for the long haul, for the long term. So what do you see as some key considerations for Australian businesses to expand their operations in India?
Well, I think to the Minister's point, it is the moment, and it's this confluence of many things. So it's the confluence of the reforms that the Minister's outlined. It's the confluence of how our economy is transforming around the things I talked about. And for us to kind of take the opportunity to deal with the narrowness of our own economic base, which is a real vulnerability. You just got to think 10 companies pay 30% of all the tax, so our fortunes are vested in a few. And Australian companies know that. They know that they have to keep working the China relationship, but they have got to get into different markets and different products. So I think the confluence of that, obviously a more difficult China, and people aren't proposing to exit out of that, obviously, but it's kind of what you go to in order to give yourself a really strong portfolio. So I think business kind of gets that. What do they need? Well, I think the first thing is I think we need to understand the landscape. And so I think there's a real role for Austrade, and I know Austrade's here, and looking at some of the structures that we've done in other jurisdictions like the Australian-New Zealand Leadership Forum, the China CEO Roundtable, those permanent and continuous structures that have business-to-business dialogue in a very structured way with kind of out-of-session working groups where people work through problem solving. I think about the New Zealand relationship, all those issues of visa, entry into the airports have all got sorted out just by people saying this would work better, putting ideas to government like Dan and those getting fixed. So I think that kind of making it easier to navigate. I think one of the things that we've got to start thinking about is making sure that large corporations are part of that thinking. I think there is often a bit of a tendency to just sort of take SMEs on trade delegations. Actually, in the Indian case, you actually need to take the big companies, and there's got to be a lot more marrying of people together, SMEs, large companies, going to India together, and then I think helping Australian companies form partnerships because in this market, in the Chinese market, it's not easy to go in as a single Australian company. It's much easier to go in with a partnership, and I think that's where Australia can play a really important role to do a bit of that marriage guidance service, if you will, that allows people to understand who they might partner. And then the final point, and that's partly my job working with the Minister, we've got to make sure people understand the size of the prize here. I mean, the size of the prize here is staggering. And so if you're sitting in a board table and you haven't talked about India for a long time, well, you probably need to give yourself a bit of a kick because, where is a market growing, at 9% off a $3 trillion base? Where is a market growing in terms of technology and diversification that is also a kind of, a reforming system, part of an agreement? And I agree with the Minister, I think this will be a leading edge agreement, and so it's crucial to do it properly. Suddenly you've got this platform. Now, if you're not doing your work as a company, you'll miss that moment that we've been talking about. So that's partly my job, is to make sure people are really clear about the scale of the opportunity here, which is staggering.
Jennifer, do you think this goes into the fact that there's still poor levels of India literacy amongst Australian businesses? I mean,
absolutely.
How are we going to overcome that? The fact that, not just Australian companies, I mean, it's the wider community as well, I think, that we really need to change at the boardroom level, at the C-suite level, understanding of India. I mean, I'm sure it's the same in India about understanding of Australia,
sure.
But today we're talking about the launch of this update. How can we lift that India literacy amongst Australian companies?
It's a really good question, and I think the Diaspora work the Minister's launched today, that's one real anchor piece of work that we should use. I think the thing I wouldn't do is start saying we've got to have quotas on boards. I think those things have never worked. Indian literacy is not about Indian representation, if that makes sense. But I do think that we need to do more on what is the kind of business environment that people are going to be going into, and kind of maybe dispel, I guess, a little bit of the mythology that this is just really, really hard. Because lots of things are hard, that doesn't mean they're not worth doing. So I think that's one area that we should be doing. I think I think one of the challenges is obviously, and this is why the Minister's right about updating the strategy. I mean, COVID has been a very, very difficult time, and many companies, when I talk to them about thinking about the future, they've been busy trying to get their supply lines working. They've been trying to put food on supermarket shelves. They've been trying to keep their staff attached. They've been trying to manage 1,600 public health orders around our very joined up federation. And so now, to the Minister's point, now's the moment where people are we've crossed that Rubicon. Now we've got to start as a collective in Australia, business and government. What are our new markets? What are our new industries? What are our big opportunities? How do we play to our strengths? And that's why the rare earth minerals is so important. And then business and government working together to increase that literacy and start to bank in those opportunities. But I'll be honest, if you'd had this conversation with Australian companies 6 months ago or 12 months ago, they'd just say, Jennifer, I just got to get food on supermarket shelves. And I think the whole supply chain issue is something that the strategy has to keep evolving. And then final point, the FTA is crucial, but there's a lot of stuff that's happening in this strategy that's practical, that's doable, that all goes to building a stronger relationship.
I'm going to open up to the audience in a moment, but I did want to ask the Minister one more question, because you have also launched today the India Diaspora Mapping Strategy, a really equally as important document. How do you envisage government transforming the success of the Indian diaspora into gains in the economic relationship? Do we have the structures, the consultation mechanisms in place to ensure that can happen going forward? As you said, it's fastest growing diaspora, certainly significant for part of Australia's economy.
And it's bringing skills with it that we need. And so, I think more and more there's a recognition of that in the business community, that this diaspora brings with it the skills that we really need. And the other thing that it brings with it is youth. And that's the remarkable thing about India. I mean, there's the figure that I just can't stop using, and if you've heard it before, forgive me, but 1 million people turn 18 every month in India. 1 million people turn 18 every month in India. I mean, it's staggering when you stop and think of that. And that youth, that vibrancy, we're capturing here in Australia, but we can capture more of it, and that's what I would hope to see, and that's why I think the announcements today are very important, because we need that joined up policy. We need our public services more joined up. We need our business communities more joined up. We've just got to be doing everything we can to continue to grow and enhance the relationship. It's why we want a mobility chapter as part of the agreement, but my hope is that it will be a mobility chapter that we can build on into the future. So all these things I think point to the importance of us understanding the diaspora, but then seeking to be able to utilise and harness it going forward.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to ask questions from the audience. Please wait for the roving microphone to come to you, and just to state your name and the organisation that you come from. Start with Lee.
Thanks, Lisa. Hi, Minister. Hi, Jennifer. Lee Howard from AsiaLink Business. Just thank you for your remarks today, but also your enthusiasm for this area. It's wonderful to see. I have a question for you, Minister, about investment flows. And the backdrop to this is perhaps the conventional approach to trade and investment that for decades, if not longer, countries have primarily focused on flows in the direction that benefited the most, maybe even at times you could say transactionally. And what I mean by this is that when it comes to exports or to trade, it's all about what we can export. When it comes to investment, it's all about the inward flows that we can attract, and that it was essentially the responsibility of other countries to look at the flows the other way. Now, the IS goes further than this, and the update seems to build even further again in terms of making these strategic approaches to a partnership model between Australia and India. So I just wanted to reconfirm, in terms of that partnership model around, say, investment for one, is that the model we can continue to expect to see, that Australia does see it of interest to promote Australian companies investing in India? And does it mean we've perhaps left behind some old school thinking that it's not actually in our interest to be promoting investment into another country? Thanks.
Well, absolutely. And can I tell you, under my watch, this idea that, imports are bad, exports are great, it's not a mindset that we should be entertaining, and it's the same for investment. I mean, inward and outbound investment are each critically important to our national success. And I hope that's very clear in this document. And, let's look at education. Nothing would give me greater delight than to see more investment from our higher education and our vocational education sector into India. And now there's been reform in India in that area, and there's a real opportunity for us I think, to be able to look at investment from here into India. That will help them with their vocational and higher education needs, but also just enhance and deepen the partnership. It's the same with critical minerals and rare earths. There's very concentrated technology and know-how in one particular market when it comes to processing rare earths and critical minerals, which means the supply chains are very concentrated. Now, we should be looking to work with India to help them build a processing capability in India. So not only are we developing that processing capability here, but we should be able to help and support them do that, because in the end, that's going to help us in terms of our exports of rare earths and critical minerals, so we can process here, but what we need, where we need other processing skills, we should be looking to India to do it. So absolutely, my mindset is we should be looking at investment flows, portfolio investment in a similar way, huge opportunities for us to get Indian investment into portfolio investment here and vice versa from Australia into India. In all these areas, we should be looking at it. These are partnerships and they advance our economies in a mutually significant way. So it's a very good point and very much my mindset. I mean, it's one of the things, that I found particularly alarming around President Trump's rhetoric on trade was that it was sort of exports good, imports bad. It's just not the case. I mean, if everyone exports and no one imports, where do you end up? Nowhere. So we've sort of got to have that in our mindset.
I think you're right, Minister. I think this whole question of building mutual capability is absolutely crucial. And if you have a kind of very simplistic view about trade relationships as kind of flows of investment only, as opposed to mutuality of capability, where there's great opportunities to grow from each other, but also grow together into expanding markets. I mean, the Asian middle class, 3.5 billion people by the end of this decade. There's a great opportunity for collaboration and capability building. We don't do enough of that discussion that you've just outlined, Minister, that practical kind of, if we can help with that rare earth processing, the opportunities for Australia are enormous.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Dean.
Thank you, Minister. My name is Didi Saxena from Oilseeds, Riverine Oil. My view is that the government-to-government relationship is outstanding. The diaspora-to-diaspora relationship is very good. But the business-to-business relationship is below average, and that is reality on the ground. And I think India is a very touch-it, feel-it, experience market. It is not just a process, system-driven, macroeconomic market. And I think you touched upon the point of literacy. I think Indians think Australia is too small, too far, too difficult. Or not so difficult, but particularly the Australians, especially the large corporates, have a very strong view that India is too hard, too difficult, too complex. Reality on the ground is opportunities exist. Investments are taking place. We should do a few case studies of countries like Israel, Singapore, Canada, many others. I'm just not talking United States. I personally feel that the governments, both sides, must invest hard dollars in improving and not talking about literacy. This can only happen through micro-level engagements, very intense, not huge groups of industry members going. And I think there are institutions on both sides, BCA here and CII in India. But most importantly, I think that's the most critical thing, because one thing is for sure, timing is an important factor. And everybody is looking at India. So, I mean, my personal view is that apart from doing reports, having agendas, government-to-government people taking a lot of interest, we really need to do something to make business to business, and something as a catalytic agent which the government can play. Thank you.
Stevie, and can I just acknowledge your wonderful contribution to the economic relationship between Australia and India. Your leadership has been outstanding, and I know this is something that you've been talking about and willing and wanting governments to do for some time. And my hope is that part of the announcement that I've made today and those dollars that we've announced today can do exactly what you're talking about. I think it's important that we have delegations, but you're right, they've also got to be strategic. It's no point having delegations for the sake of them. What we've got to do is make sure that there's that matching that is occurring. And we've already started on this. We've got the Australian Business India Exchange, which is trying to do that. And as a matter of fact, we are so enamoured with the early success that we've seen from it. I'm looking to use a similar exchange for what we're doing in trying to enhance our partnerships with Vietnam and Indonesia. So we've got the nucleus of something which I think can work, but now we've really got to put the flesh on the bone. And I hope that you will keep just pointing and hounding us on this, because I think you're really, really onto something that will unlock the key to success in a significant way.
I think your point's right. You've got to have this. This is why I think the BCA and the Confederation could work in a kind of more structured way, because it's all that problem solving you've got to do. Because I think there are things that companies from India tell me about how hard it is to do business here. So particularly planning, getting planning approvals, environmental approvals, many other examples where, that kind of, deters other investment coming forward. So we, I think, have to kind of have that ongoing dialogue that helps government problem solve that in a way that's of mutual benefit to both companies in Australia and companies in India. And I think we need to think about those structures that allow that problem solving that you've talked about.
I'm getting the wrap up. I would love to get one more really quick question in and sort of...
Thanks, Lisa. I'm Martin Artenstein from the Australia-India Chamber of Commerce. We've heard some great initiatives unveiled by the Minister, backed up by some real dollars, and hopefully the free trade agreement sometime soon. I think Lisa's hit it on the head when she talked about Indian literacy amongst the Australian community, and so for that reason I want to address my question to Jennifer, if I may. What can we as business organisations do to promote the Indian literacy? I'm seeing plenty of engagement and inquiry out of India into Australia, but not much going the other way, in spite of the successes that you mentioned.
Yeah, look, I think some of the things we've talked about this morning, I think some kind of structure between the various business organisations that is more predictable. I think to the Minister's point and my point, I think just running delegations, it's not the way to solve that problem. They're good, they're helpful, but I think they're not in and of themselves going to solve the problem. I think one way I think we could do it is to actually think about it from an industry point of view rather than just try and boil the ocean. So what are the key industries where we want to diversify the economy, around the government's modern manufacturing initiative, where we think there's mutuality of both capability building and opportunity, and then have some very focused conversations with companies from India, companies from Australia around how do we problem solve, how do we actually kind of expand that. And I think we've all got to do a better job at just promoting that, to the Minister's point, this is the moment. And if companies now post-COVID are thinking, well, what's my next big growth opportunity? And if they're not thinking about this market, particularly if they're in those industries that I've talked about, then they've really got to give themselves a bit of a shake. And you and I have got to, I think, give them a shake along as well.
Well, clearly the Minister launching the India Economic Strategy Update today is going to enhance and augment the Australia-India relationship. I do want to give one plug for our institute later this year hosting the Australia-India Leadership Dialogue, which we also look forward to complementing the IES when we host that in Delhi later this year, as will, of course, the interim free trade agreement, Minister, that we're all, fingers crossed, looking forward to hopefully in the coming week. So with that, can I ask Professor Michael Wesley to come and join us to give the vote of thanks for today?
Well, what a pleasure it's been to listen to three incredibly passionate and articulate advocates of the Australia-India relationship. Australia and India have been engaging for a long time. I was just thinking our second Prime Minister, Alfred Deakin, who was a graduate of the University of Melbourne, wrote 2 books on India. And we're currently mining our records at the moment, and we can find, going back to the 1930s, Indian students here at the University of Melbourne. I think if we dig a little bit further, we'll go back even further than that. But I think for most of the last 75 years, things haven't really clicked between Australia and India. But as you said, Minister, this is the moment, and it's incredibly exciting to be part of the moment and to just see all of the planets starting to align. And I just wanted to say how terrific it is to see the government sort of laser focused on building the relationship at this incredibly important moment. The realisation that you've got to build all strands of the relationship at the same time, that they're complementary to each other and that they support each other. So it's great to have a government that's laser focused on the relationship. And Minister, I think you're the point of the laser. You are the person who's really, taken the government and really driven a government agenda forward. Jennifer, thank you to you as well. You have consistently sought to raise the business community's eyes towards Asia and to India in particular. Your comments this morning about literacy, about industry level engagement, I think are really well taken. We at the University of Melbourne are doing everything we can to be part of the moment. I very much commend the Australia-India Institute Strategy 2022 to 2026. We're incredibly excited to have Lisa as our CEO, and I agree with you, Minister. I think the Institute has a very exciting future under her leadership. But in the broader university itself, in just over a week's time, I'm taking a university-level delegation, 23 people from across 8 of our faculties. We're doing 10 cities in 10 days. When we told one of our deans that, who's coming along, she said, "What is this, a university delegation or a Rolling Stones tour?" But it's very significant because it's the first university delegation to go anywhere in the world, and we chose India to be that place. We are halfway through our own engaging with India strategy at the University of Melbourne, so this is a way of resetting that and really re-engaging with India. But let me finish by saying you've both honoured us by coming to the University of Melbourne to launch these incredibly important reports. We hope we can lure both of you back before too long, but thank you again on behalf of us all.